Okay, let's start. Number 1. The Witch Bishop's Sealed Room. The year is 1626. Beneath Bamberg Cathedral in Bavaria, a prince bishop has just authorized construction of a sealed containment chamber, a room built to hold the physical evidence of an entity that more than 150 isolated witnesses, held separately with no contact between them, have described in identical physical terms. The entity is not human. The chamber is built for it. Bishop Johann Georg II Fuchs von Dornheim's own administrative construction record uses the legal phrase material evidence, not relics, not spiritual artifacts, not confiscated property. Material evidence. The chamber does not appear in any published survey of the building. A structural survey in 1978 found an anomalous void beneath the cathedral floor. The restoration team was redirected. The void has not been investigated since. Bamberg Cathedral was begun in 1004 under Emperor Heinrich II and consecrated in 1012. It is a Romanesque basilica and one of the largest ecclesiastical buildings in Bavaria. During the trials of 1626 to 1631, a prosecution that would execute approximately 300 people and produce the most concentrated regional witch trial record in German history, the cathedral served as the institutional center of the diocesan administration. The Bamberg State Archive holds the original trial transcripts. The bishop's administrative records for the same period include construction documentation for a sealed chamber beneath the cathedral whose purpose the bishop himself defined in writing. That chamber does not appear in the cathedral's official architectural history. Torture in the early modern trial context was designed to elicit confessions of specific crimes, attendance at Sabbaths, pacts with named figures, acts of maleficium against identified victims, and to produce names of accomplices. This is documented in the procedural records of the era. Torture is effective at generating confessions that match interrogators' expectations because the accused quickly learn what answers stop the process. Torture does not produce consistent physical descriptions of a third party. No inquisitor at Bamberg was asking witnesses to describe a physical appearance. Physical descriptions of an entity's height, cranial dimensions, and ocular characteristics were not a standard interrogatory category. The descriptions were volunteered. More than 150 people, held separately, with no documented contact between them, produced the following description across the transcript record, now held in the Bamberg State Archive. Taller than the average man. Skull longer and narrower than standard human cranial proportion. Eyes described as amber-colored, reflective in darkness. 3 independently measurable physical characteristics, volunteered by 150 people who had not spoken to each other. The entity they described matches no documented human anatomical profile. It is not classified in any theological category the Inquisition applied to human defendants. The bishop built a room for its physical evidence. Here's where it gets strange. Material evidence is in the bishop's own construction authorization record, not in a rumor, not in a later historian's account, in the bishop's documented administrative paperwork for a sealed chamber beneath Bamberg Cathedral. A chamber built to hold physical matter related to a proceeding in which 150 separate witnesses, producing identical physical descriptions without contact, collectively named something that was there. The chamber was a containment vessel, built by church authority, sealed under church authority, designated in the institutional record for a specific category of non-human material. In 1978, a structural survey of the cathedral conducted during restoration work identified an anomalous void beneath the floor. The restoration team was redirected to a different section of the building. The 1978 report does not mention the void. The cathedral's official position is that no sealed chamber from the bishop's era exists beneath the building. The 1978 redirection is attributed to a change in project scope, a standard administrative decision during restoration. The material evidence phrasing is read by historians as a reference to confiscated personal property from the accused standard witch trial practice. The documented absence of contact between the 150 witnesses producing identical physical descriptions is not addressed in the official academic literature. The anomalous void confirmed by the 1978 structural survey has not been investigated since the restoration team was redirected. The containment chamber from the bishop's construction record is not acknowledged in the cathedral's official architectural documentation. The entity whose physical remains required a sealed room beneath a cathedral, according to the builder's own paperwork, has not been publicly identified. What material evidence did a prince-bishop with full diocesan authority build a sealed room beneath a cathedral to contain? If 150 people with no contact between them independently described the same entity's physical characteristics, taller, narrower skull, amber reflective eyes, what were they separately encountering? A void beneath the cathedral floor was found in 1978, and the restoration team was redirected. Who made that decision, and under whose authority? More than 150 people, with no documented contact between each other, described the same entity in identical physical terms. The next location does not have testimony, it has remains. Beneath the most sacred site in Western Christianity, a credentialed archaeologist in the 1970s found a sealed chamber containing physical remains with cranial dimensions inconsistent with standard Roman period human anatomy. The Vatican was notified. Access was sealed within 72 hours. Number 2. The Binding Stone. The year is 1975. Beneath the most studied religious building in the world, a Franciscan archaeologist with institutional authorization has just broken through into a sealed rock-cut chamber that does not appear on any architectural plan of the site. Inside, physical remains with cranial dimensions inconsistent with standard Roman period human anatomy. Inscriptions on the walls in a writing system that matches no identified language in the comparative linguistic record. The Vatican was notified. Access to the chamber was sealed within 72 hours, before any formal institutional review of its contents was completed. The chamber is still sealed. The field notes describing what is inside have been classified. The published excavation report does not contain the chamber. The Church of the Holy Sepulcher stands on the site identified since the 4th century as the location of the burial and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. It is the central pilgrimage terminus of Western Christianity. The building is administered under a joint custody agreement by 6 Christian denominations under the status quo arrangement codified in 1757. Virgilio Corbo, of the Studium Biblicum Franciscanum, the Franciscan research institution holding formal authorization to conduct archaeological work within the complex, led a sanctioned excavation in 1975. His team was working in the Chapel of St. Helena, carved into the bedrock below the main floor of the complex. What they found during that work was not part of the sanctioned investigation. The sealed chamber was identified during the Chapel of St. Helena restoration. Corbo's field notes, working documentation produced before any institutional review, record what the team physically encountered inside. The inscriptions on the chamber walls belong to no identified writing system. They do not match any documented Semitic script, any Greek or Latin variant, any Aramaic, Nabatean, Syriac, or Coptic writing tradition recorded in the comparative linguistic record available to the research team. Unknown script. On the walls of a sealed containment chamber within the most carefully studied ecclesiastical complex on Earth, the physical remains were described in Corbo's field notes as having cranial dimensions inconsistent with standard Roman period human anatomy. Not unusual, not atypical. Inconsistent, a word that requires a standard to deviate from, and names the deviation as measurable. The remains are not from a human being within the documented anatomical range for the Roman period at this location. The Vatican was notified. The timeline from notification to sealing is recorded, 72 hours. The chamber was locked within 72 hours of the Vatican's notification. No formal institutional review of its contents was completed before the sealing. The Vatican locked the chamber first. Here's where it gets strange. The Studium Biblicum Franciscanum classified Corbo's complete field notes following the excavation. The classification covered the pre-review documentation, the record of what the team physically observed and measured before any institutional assessment was applied to it. Corbo subsequently published the results of the Chapel of St. Helena excavation. The published report contains no reference to the chamber, the inscriptions, or the physical remains. The official academic record of a sanctioned excavation conducted by credentialed researchers under institutional authorization does not contain the chamber they found. A researcher can read Virgilio Corbo's published excavation report today and find no indication that a sealed chamber was discovered. The classification covers it. The publication omits it. The Vatican has issued no statement on it. The Studium Biblicum Franciscanum has issued no public comment. Corbo died in 1991. His classified notes remain with the Franciscan institution. What is not in the published record? An explanation of the chamber's existence. An identification of the unknown script on its walls. An analysis of the remains with non-standard cranial dimensions. An account of who authorized the 72-hour sealing. The contents of Virgilio Corbo's classified field notes. Any institutional acknowledgement that the chamber was found. Any institutional denial that the chamber was found. The published record does not dispute the chamber. It acts as though the chamber was never there. The chamber is still sealed. The classification of its documentation is still in effect. The entity whose remains are inside remains unidentified. The institution that sealed it has not explained what it is holding. What did Virgilio Corbo's team find inside a sealed, rock-cut chamber beneath the most studied ecclesiastical complex in the world? What writing system is on those chamber walls, and what does it say? Who authorized the 72-hour sealing, and under what institutional framework does a research team's pre-review field notes become classified material? Why does the physical evidence from the chamber not appear in the published excavation report of an institutionally sanctioned investigation? The chamber beneath the Holy Sepulcher was sealed by institutional authority in 72 hours. No identification has been made of what was inside. The next location does not have a sealed chamber beneath a religious site. It is a purpose-built containment structure in itself. A 16-sided geometric building constructed by the Knights Templar to specific architectural specifications, housing a kept thing named by 7 separate witnesses under full Inquisition authority. 7 trained inquisitors did not ask what it was. Number 3. Number 3. The Templars' 16-sided containment. The year is 1160. The Knights Templar are completing their Portuguese headquarters at Tomar, a structure built not to the standard specifications of a European church, but to the specific geometry of a 16-sided polygon, modeled by their own documented intention on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Its 16 flat faces meet at 16 angles. A true rotunda has a single curved surface. This does not. The Templars have built something else, a geometric containment structure with a sealed inner sanctum that does not appear on any official documentation of the site. 7 Templar knights who served at this structure, interrogated separately under the full coercive authority of the Inquisition in 1307, each named the same kept thing inside it. 7 inquisitors, trained to pursue every named claim to its conclusion, each declined to ask what the kept thing was. The thing kept at Tomar has not been identified. The sealed inner sanctum has not been opened. The Convent of Christ in Tomar was founded by the Knights Templar in 1160 under Grand Master Gualdin Pais. It remains one of the most complete surviving Templar complexes in Europe and holds UNESCO World Heritage designation, granted in 1983. The Charola, the original Templar church at the complex's center, was designed as a functional space for mounted knights who could attend services without dismounting, a documented design requirement. The sealed inner sanctum at the Charola's center is not mentioned in any official architectural documentation of the site available to the public. The Templar trials of 1307 to 1312 produced some of the most extensive testimony records in medieval legal history. The proceedings were designed to suppress the order entirely and involved hundreds of depositions taken by trained inquisitors under protocols requiring exhaustive follow-up on all claims. The Vatican secret archives hold the transcripts. 7 separate depositions from Templars who served at Tomar contain the phrase, "the thing kept at Tomar." 7 different men, at different stages of the proceedings, naming something specific at a specific location, without describing it. In each of the 7 depositions, the recorded transcript moves to the next question. 7 inquisitors, documented in the procedural record as routinely pressing witnesses on minor financial discrepancies, details of initiation ceremonies, names of private witnesses, did not ask what the thing kept at Tomar was. 7 times, the phrase was recorded. 7 times, the questioning advanced. The archaeoacoustic properties of the Charola's 16-sided geometry have been measured by researchers in the documented field of archaeoacoustics, which examines deliberate acoustic design in historic structures. The measurements indicate the 16-sided interior produces a standing wave pattern in the central chamber, consistent with documented acoustic specifications for containment design. This is a measured architectural property, not an interpretation. Here's where it gets strange. The Templar Inquisitions of 1307 to 1312 were designed to be exhaustive. The transcripts show inquisitors pursuing minor inconsistencies across extended and repeated sessions. 7 depositions from Tomar Station Templars contain the thing kept at Tomar. 7 recorded silences follow it. A phrase naming a specific kept thing at a specific institutional location, produced by 7 separate witnesses, is exactly the category of testimony the inquisitorial process was built to pursue. The Templars built a 16-sided geometric containment structure. They kept something inside it. 7 of them named it under torture and interrogation. No one asked what it was. The thing kept at Tomar was named 7 times. It was not pursued once. The Vatican's position is that the phrase refers to the Templar reliquary collection at Tomar, a standard euphemism for treasured devotional objects. The 7 instances of no follow-up are attributed to incomplete transcript records. The archaeoacoustic analysis is not acknowledged in official site documentation. The inner sanctum is described in visitor materials as a liturgical space in preservation condition. The thing kept at Tomar has not been identified. The sealed inner sanctum has not been independently surveyed. The Convent of Christ remains under Portuguese national authority and UNESCO joint oversight. The containment structure the Templars built is still standing. What it contains is still inside. What is the thing kept at Tomar? Why did 7 inquisitors, operating under a process designed to pursue every named claim to its conclusion, each independently decline to ask what it was? What does a 16-sided geometry produce acoustically, and why does the Chirola's specific design match the specifications associated with containment rather than worship? 7 witnesses named a kept thing and no inquisitor pursued it. The next location does not require inference about function. A diocesan administrative record, written 52 years before the official explanation for the objects it describes, designates 3 iron structures as binding vessels for beings of foreign nature. The structures are still on the Tower of Street. Lambert's Church in Munster, Germany. Number 4. Number 4. The binding cages. The year is 1484. 3 iron cages have been built under the authority of the Diocese of Munster in Westphalia, northern Germany. The diocesan administrative record filed for these cages designates their purpose in Latin: retinaculum pro entibus extranis naturae, binding vessels for beings of foreign nature. The cages are not built for execution display. They are not built for reliquary storage. They are built as restraint hardware for something the diocese classifies as beings of non-standard nature. 52 years later, in 1536, the bodies of 3 executed Anabaptist leaders will be displayed in the same cages. That display becomes the official explanation for their existence. The official explanation does not account for the 52 years between their construction and that first documented use, or for the designation in the 1484 diocesan record, or for why cages built for corpse display were engineered with locking mechanisms designed for sustained load-bearing. The cages are still on the tower of Street Lambert's Church in Munster today. They have not been examined. Street Lambert's Church, the Lambertikirche, stands in the center of Munster's Old City. It is a late Gothic parish church, the primary civic church of the city, and among the most visible landmarks in the region. The 3 iron cages hang from its tower at a height visible from the street. They have hung there since 1536, when the bodies of Jan of Leyden, Bernd Krechting, and Bernd Knipperdoling were placed in them following their public torture and execution. The standard historical account is, the cages were made for those bodies, as a deterrent against religious insurrection. That account is documented, verified, and historically significant. It does not explain 1484. The Diocese of Munster produced administrative records throughout the 15th and early 16th centuries as part of standard ecclesiastical governance, property inventories, construction authorizations, institutional records of objects in diocesan custody, and their designated functions. The 1484 record is in that category. It designates 3 iron cages as binding vessels for beings of foreign nature. That is their official institutional purpose, as recorded by the diocese. Not execution display, not deterrence. Binding, active physical restraint of something requiring restraint. Foreign nature, a designation that places the intended occupants outside standard human classification. The cages themselves are approximately 3 feet in diameter, constructed from iron bands with locking closures at the top. Their structural specifications are consistent with sustained load-bearing. designed to hold the weight of a living occupant across an extended period. The 1536 corpses were already dead when placed in the cages. A dead body requires no locking mechanism with load-bearing specifications. It requires a container. The locking mechanisms on each cage are not display architecture. They are restraint architecture. They were built before the Anabaptists existed as a movement. Here's where it gets strange. The Anabaptist executions of 1536 are documented and historically significant. The bodies were displayed. The cages were used for that purpose. None of this is disputed. What is not accounted for is the 1484 diocesan record that precedes those executions by 52 years and names the cage's purpose as binding vessels for beings of foreign nature. The official 1536 explanation and the institutional 1484 designation are not the same thing. The 1484 designation does not describe the 1536 use. The 1536 use does not explain the 1484 designation. A diocese in 1484 built 3 iron restraint structures with locking mechanisms for beings it classified as of foreign nature, and 52 years later, those structures were repurposed for the display of human corpses. The repurposing became the official history. The original purpose is in the diocesan administrative record. The Diocese of Munster has issued no statement on the 1484 record. The cage's structural specifications are not addressed in official architectural documentation of the church. The iron cages on the Lambertikirche Tower have never been removed for independent examination of their internal dimensions, locking mechanisms, or load specifications. They remain on the tower. Whatever the Diocese of Munster built them to hold between 1484 and 1536 has not been identified. What did the Diocese of Munster build 3 iron-binding vessels to contain in 1484, 52 years before the Anabaptists gave them an official explanation? Why are the structural specifications of the cages consistent with restraining a living occupant rather than displaying a corpse? Who authorized the construction of binding vessels for beings of foreign nature, and under what authority does a diocese classify entities requiring iron restraint as beings outside standard human nature? The iron cages at Street Lamberts are visible from the street, church-built restraint hardware that predates its official history by 52 years, with a written designation naming its intended occupants as beings of non-standard nature. The next location's containment is not iron. It is stone, sealed passages in Suffolk, England, through which 2 children emerged with green skin, an unknown language, and an account of an underground world without a sun. The church sealed what they came through. Number 5. The Pit of the Green Ones. The year is 1135. 2 children have just come up from underground near the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England. Their skin is green, not jaundiced, not pale, green, a consistent, documented pigmentation across their entire skin surface. They speak a language no one recognizes. They know nothing of the sun. They say they came from an underground place without light, called Street, Martin's Land, reached through a network of passages beneath the earth. The Church of Street, Mary the Virgin, Woolpit, receives them. The girl is baptized. The passages they came through are sealed. Whatever else is in Street. Martin's Land, whatever community they came from, whatever other beings live in an underground world without a sun, is now behind a sealed entrance controlled by church authority. That sealed passage is still not accounted for in any archaeological survey of the Woolpit area. 2 independent medieval historians documented the Green Children's arrival. William of Newburgh, writing in his Historia Rerum Anglicarum around 1196, was a trained ecclesiastical historian whose chronicle is a primary academic source for 12th century English events. He describes the green children with specificity, the consistent skin color, the unfamiliar clothing, the unknown language, the refusal to eat anything but raw beans for weeks after arrival, and the location, Woolpit, Suffolk, during the reign of King Stephen. He notes that the children's limb proportions were slightly elongated compared to local children of the same apparent age. He records it without emphasis. Ralph of Coggeshall, abbot of Coggeshall Abbey in Essex, writing in the Chronicon Anglicanum around 1220, had institutional connections to the Suffolk region and stated that he had spoken with individuals who had personal knowledge of the surviving child, the girl, in her later years. He documents the same skin color, the same location, the same period, and the same account of underground origin. 2 historians, no shared source, the same physical description, at the same location, in the same reign. The children said they came from a place called Street Martin's Land. It was underground, no sun reached it. The people there, they said, were like them. They had followed the sound of bells through underground passages and emerged into a pit near the harvest field at Woolpit. The pit was a wolf trap, a working agricultural feature, sunk into the earth at the field's edge. The children were found in it. The boy died within weeks. The girl survived. She was received into the household of Sir Richard de Calne, a local knight documented in the area. Over months, her skin color faded as her diet expanded from beans to ordinary food. She learned English. She was baptized by the Church of Street. Mary the Virgin, the parish church of Woolpit, which is the institutional act by which the church formally incorporated her into the Christian community and assumed authority over her account of origin. She eventually married. Her husband is in local records. Here's where it gets strange. Two independent historians, producing accounts separated by 25 years, agree on a physical description for which no documented biological mechanism exists in the medieval or modern record. Consistent green pigmentation across the entire skin surface of two children, fading over months as diet changes. That dietary dependence is a physiological specificity. It names a biological process. It does not identify what process. No examination of the girl in her later years produced any medical account of what produced the pigmentation or what made it disappear. The underground passages through which the children traveled from Street Martin's Land were documented in local accounts as having been sealed following their arrival. The Church of Street, Mary the Virgin administered the baptism, the institutional act of containment, and holds no documented record of what investigation, if any, was conducted of the pit or the passages below it. The pit in which the children appeared is not inventoried in any archaeological survey of the Woolpit area. The sealed passages to Street Martin's Land have not been located or opened. Whatever else is in Street, Martin's Land is behind a sealed entrance that has not been examined by any institution with authority over the site. What biological mechanism produces consistent green pigmentation across the entire skin surface of two children, fading over months as diet changes? And what does the dietary dependence tell us about the physiology it belongs to? Where are the passages that connected a harvest field in Suffolk to the underground place the children called Street Martin's Land? Why do two independent medieval historians writing decades apart agree on identical physical details of the same event at the same location? What did the Church of Street Mary the Virgin receive when it baptized a green-skinned child who said she came from underground and who authorized the sealing of the passages she came through? The passages from Street Martin's Land were sealed at Woolpit, and whatever remains underground has not been reached since. The next location documents a different church response to a different access point. Not sealed passages, but a sealed cave, and not two children who emerged from it, but centuries of pilgrims who entered it and returned with accounts of beings of inhuman form. In 1497, Pope Alexander VI ordered the entrance sealed by decree. The cave is still locked. Number 6. Number 6. The papal sealed gate. The year is 1497. A pope has just signed an administrative decree ordering the physical sealing of a cave on a lake island in County Donegal, Ireland. The cave is the entrance to a structure the institutional record of the Catholic Church has administered as a pilgrimage site for 3 centuries, a site where documented pilgrims entering the cave have returned with consistent accounts of beings of inhuman form encountered inside. 2 independent medieval historians documented those accounts in writing. Dozens of pilgrim testimonies across 3 centuries produced the same structural description of the same entities. In 1497, Pope Alexander VI responded to 3 centuries of documented testimony about non-human beings inside a cave by ordering the cave entrance sealed. The cave is still sealed. It has not been reopened since the papal decree was executed. Station Island on Lough Derg in County Donegal, Ireland, is administered today by the Augustinian Order as an active Catholic pilgrimage site. The site's documented history as a sanctioned pilgrimage destination begins in the 12th century, when the cave, known as Street Patrick's Purgatory, was opened to pilgrims under church supervision. The prior of the island oversaw access. Entry required institutional permission. The Augustinian Order maintained the structure of the pilgrimage from its establishment through the 1497 sealing. After the sealing, they maintained the pilgrimage site. What changed in 1497 was access to the cave. The site continued. The entrance was locked. What pilgrims encountered inside is documented in the Tractatus de Purgatorio Sancti Patricii, written by Henry of Saltrey, a Cistercian monk, around 1184 AD. Henry interviewed Owen, a knight who entered the cave around 1148 under institutional authorization, and recorded his account directly. The Tractatus circulated in manuscript across medieval Europe for 3 centuries. It documents beings of inhuman form, forma inhumana in Henry's Latin, with specific physical characteristics. The beings had wrong proportions, limb lengths, and cranial dimensions that deviated from the human standard. They were organized. They communicated. They knew Owen's name. They were not demons in the conventional iconographic tradition. They were described as physically present, physically measurable, and physically non-human. The Tractatus is not the only record. The Vision of Tyndale, written independently around 1149 by a monk named Marcus in Regensburg, describes a journey through a cave structure in identical geographical terms: underground, in Ireland, on an island in a lake, with beings of similar proportional description. 2 independent authors, 2 different countries, the same cave, the same entities. Neither references the other's work. Pilgrim accounts across the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries. Letters, journey records, testimonies in monastic archives from England, France, the Low Countries, and the Italian peninsula document consistent encounters with beings of inhuman form inside the cave on Lough Derg. Not uniform accounts, consistent ones. The same structural elements, produced by travelers from across Europe who had no documented contact with each other. Then 1497. Here's where it gets strange. Pope Alexander VI issued a decree ordering the cave sealed. The papal brief, a documented administrative instrument, closed the cave entrance specifically. Not the island, not the pilgrimage, the cave. The Augustinian prior was required to seal the entrance under papal authority. The stated justification in the brief names commercial exploitation as the grounds for closure, a standard administrative formula for pilgrimage site regulation. That language does not address the Tractatus. It does not address the Vision of Tyndale. It does not address 3 centuries of consistent pilgrim testimony from across Europe documenting the same beings with the same physical characteristics. A papal decree is an institutional response to an institutional concern. 3 centuries of documented testimony about non-human entities inside a cave is an institutional concern. The decree sealed the cave. The cave beneath Station Island has not been reopened since 1497. The Augustinian order administers the pilgrimage site today. The entrance is sealed. The Tractatus de Purgatorio Sancti Patricii is in scholarly translation and in print. Its account of beings of inhuman form in the cave remains in the academic record. No institutional assessment of what those beings were has been issued by any church body. The cave that held them is still locked. What did Owen and the pilgrims who followed him encounter inside the cave between 1148 and 1497? What does forma inhumana designate in a 12th century Cistercian's direct interview account that 3.5 centuries of consistent testimony accumulated before the Church sealed the entrance rather than explain? Why does the 1497 papal brief name commercial exploitation as the reason for sealing a cave that 3 centuries of testimony described as inhabited by beings of non-human form? The cave at Lough Derg was sealed by papal decree after 3 centuries of documented encounters with inhuman form beings. The gate remains locked. The next location's sealing did not begin with a decree, it began with an observation. In 590 AD, Pope Gregory I documented seeing an entity of unusual appearance atop a structure on the banks of the Tiber. That same year, he sealed the lower levels of the structure. In the 9th century, a pope referenced what remained below in 9 words. Number 7. Number 7. The matter below. The year is 590 AD. Pope Gregory I has just sealed the lower levels of a structure on the banks of the Tiber in Rome that the Church has operated as a fortress and prison for more than a century. In Gregory's own record, the sealing of the lower levels occurs in the same year as his documented observation of an entity of unusual appearance standing atop the structure. 2 events, 1 year, 1 pope, something seen above, and something sealed below. The structure is Hadrian's Mausoleum, a Roman imperial tomb built in 135 AD to specifications that match containment construction ratios more closely than they match documented imperial funerary proportions. The church repurposed it, maintained it, sealed its lower levels, and left a 9th century papal administrative record that references the lower levels in 9 words: the matter in the lower place. No subject beyond matter. No elaboration. The lower levels are still sealed. Their contents are not inventoried in any publicly available documentation. Castel Sant'Angelo began as Hadrian's mausoleum, built 135 to 139 AD on the right bank of the Tiber. A perfect cylinder, 210 feet in diameter, raised on a square base, measuring 295 feet on each side. The cylinder-on-square combination does not appear in any other documented Roman mausoleum of the imperial period. Standard Roman funerary templates use consistent proportional relationships between diameter, height, and base that can be tracked across dozens of comparable structures. Hadrian's mausoleum does not follow those relationships. It follows the dimensional ratios of what Roman priestly texts describe as edificatio retenendi, containment construction, buildings designed for the physical confinement of a category of entity requiring separation from the general population. The church took over a structure built to containment specifications and used it as a containment facility. The church then sealed the lower levels. The church then left a papal record naming what is below as matter in a category that required no elaboration. The matter is still there. The church used the structure as a papal castle and prison for more than 4 centuries. Popes took refuge inside its interior corridors during sieges. Its documented history as an institutional place of confinement is the longest of any building in Rome. The lower levels, below the standard visitor route, were sealed during restoration work in the 1940s. Their contents are not inventoried in any publicly available documentation. They have not been accessed since the sealing. Independent researchers have not been granted access. In 590 AD, Pope Gregory I documented seeing an entity of unusual appearance standing atop the structure, an apparition that gave the castle its current name. Gregory's own record places the sealing of the lower levels in the same year as that observation. Not the year before, not the year after, the same year. Then the 9th century record. A Carolingian pope filed an administrative reference to the matter in the lower place. 9 words. No subject identified beyond matter. No elaboration. No subsequent institutional document explains the reference or names what was stored below. Here's where it gets strange. The 9th century record was written 500 years after Hadrian built the structure and 300 years after Gregory sealed the lower levels. A 9th century pope is making an administrative reference to something already present in the lower levels, something with a designated category, matter, that required a locked reference in a papal document but did not require explanation. Whoever read the record in the 9th century already knew what matter referred to. The word functions as an institutional category label for something whose nature was understood without description. It is not the language of someone recording a new discovery. It is the language of someone referencing an established and ongoing institutional responsibility. Someone has been managing this for 300 years by the time the 9th century pope writes it down. Someone will keep managing it for centuries more. The Vatican's current position is that the lower levels were sealed during 1940s restoration for structural stability, and their contents constitute routine Roman period archaeological material. The 9th century record is read as an administrative reference to stored materials. The 590 AD sealing and Gregory's observation are treated as 2 separate events connected only by their year. The lower levels of Castel Sant'Angelo are sealed today. Their contents are not inventoried in any publicly available documentation. The matter in the lower place has not been examined by any independent institution. What are the lower levels of a structure built to containment specifications that differ measurably from standard imperial funerary design? What did Pope Gregory I see above the structure in 590 AD? And what relationship does that observation have to the sealing of the lower levels in the same year? What does matter in the lower place designate? In a 9th century administrative record, that 9 Latin words were sufficient to reference without elaboration across 3 centuries of papal administration. The lower levels of Castel Sant'Angelo hold matter named in 9 words. The structure itself tells the same story, built to containment specifications that differ from documented Roman funerary design, sealed by Gregory I, the same year he observed the entity above it, referenced 3 centuries later by a 9th century pope who needed no elaboration. The next location is not sealed beneath a structure. The structure is built around what it contains. A cave in Armenia where, since the 4th century, A named non-human entity has been under active institutional management by a monastic order that exists specifically to maintain it. Number 8. Number 8. The Cave of the Mountainkeeper. The year is 327 AD. You're in the Azot River Gorge in Armenia. Gregory the Illuminator, who has just Christianized the Armenian kingdom, is authorizing the construction of a monastery at this location. The construction does not involve building over the cave here, or sealing it, or filling it. The construction involves enclosing the cave's entrance, building the monastery's exterior walls around it so that the cave is accessible only from inside the structure. The cave is the reason the monks are here. A 5th century Armenian historian will later record what is inside it. An entity named the Aravishap, classified as neither human nor animal, capable of appearing in human form but distinguishable by its proportions, associated with this specific location in the oral record predating Christian Armenia. The monks did not build a church here to worship. They built a containment structure around what was already present. The cave is still inside the building. The inner sections are sealed and have never been formally surveyed. The monastery of Gegard, whose original name, Erivank, translates directly as Monastery of the Cave, is carved into and constructed against the basalt cliffs of the Azot River Gorge, approximately 25 miles southeast of Yerevan. It holds UNESCO World Heritage designation and is among the earliest Armenian Christian foundations. Its interior includes chambers cut directly into the rock. The inner cave sections, accessible only through the monastery's restricted areas, are not open to visitors and have not been subject to any published archaeological survey. The pre-Christian record for this site comes from Movses Koronatsi, a 5th century Armenian historian whose History of Armenia is the primary academic source for early Armenian historical tradition and is available in scholarly translation. In his account of the Azot Gorge site, Koronatsi names the entity associated with the cave, the Aravishap. He classifies it in the category of beings neither human nor animal, associated with the mountain rather than any human community, capable of appearing in human form but distinguishable by its proportions. He is not writing legend. He is compiling the oral historical record of pre-Christian Armenia. The Aravishap is in that record as a named occupant of a specific cave at a specific location. The 4th century monks built their monastery around the cave entrance. They did not build over it. They did not fill it. They did not wall it shut. They built walls around the entrance and made the cave accessible from inside those walls. The monastery is a containment architecture. Its entire design logic is built around maintaining controlled access to what is inside the cave rather than ending that access. This is another independent description of non-standard physical proportions, following Bamberg, Jerusalem, and Lofturg, among others. Each record produced at a different location, by a different institution, across different centuries. Here's where it gets strange. A monastery is not a cage, but a monastery built specifically around a cave entrance, one that makes the cave accessible only from inside the institutional structure and restricts the inner sections to approved personnel, functions as one. The monks did not come to worship at this location and happened to find a cave. They came to the cave. They built their structure around it. They took institutional responsibility for what was inside. The Armenian Apostolic Church has maintained that responsibility for 17 centuries. Enclosure is not elimination. If the monks' intention was to end the presence of the Aravishap at this location, the direct action was to seal the cave mouth. They did not seal it. They preserved access to it while controlling who had that access. That is the institutional logic of a prison, not a church. The Armenian Apostolic Church characterizes the sealed inner cave sections as a preservation measure for structurally unstable rock formations. UNESCO designation requires institutional approval for structural work, which has not been sought for the inner sections. Koronatsi's account is categorized in Armenian scholarship as pre-Christian oral historical tradition. No independent research team has applied for access to the sealed inner sections. The cave with the Aravishap inside is still inside the monastery. The inner sections are still sealed. The entity Movses Koronatsi named in the 5th century has not been examined by any independent institution. What understanding of what the cave contained required the monks to build an architecture of custodianship rather than closure, to enclose it rather than seal it? What is the Aravishap that a 5th century historian classified as neither human nor animal and located in a specific cave that has been inside a church-controlled structure for 17 centuries. Why has no institution with legal authority over a UNESCO World Heritage Site requested a survey of sealed inner chambers within it? At Gegard, the monks built around the entity's cave and have maintained it for 17 centuries. The next location has no cave, no named entity, no surviving witnesses, only a sealed well beneath one of the most studied Gothic cathedrals in the world, and 2 independent records describing the same non-human physical proportions at the same location, separated by 1,000 years of transmission. The well has been sealed since the medieval period. No document records when or why. Number 9. The Well of the Bound Ones. The year is 1194. The 4th church building on this site is under construction at Chartres, France. The 3rd burned that June. Before it stood a Carolingian church, 4th century. Before that, a Roman altar, the Ara Solis, built over a site the Romans found already occupied by Druidic practice. 4 successive institutions, across 2,000 years, each building on the same location, each over the same sealed well. The well is beneath the lower crypt. It has been sealed since the medieval period. No document records when the sealing occurred, or under whose authority, or what sealed it. What the pre-Roman record says was down there is in Lucan's 1st century account of the Carnutes, entities that required human witness, present at a specific location, non-human, demanding not concealment but attendance. The Gallo-Roman stones recovered from the cathedral's foundation layers during 19th century restoration depict figures of non-standard proportions matching that description. The well is still sealed. 4 buildings have been built over it. No one has recorded why. The Puits de Saints Forts, the Well of the Strong Saints, sits below the lower crypt of Chartres Cathedral in north-central France. The cathedral, begun in 1194 and largely completed by 1220, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and among the most studied Gothic buildings in Europe. Its crypt is one of the longest in France. The Puits des Saints Forts is documented in the cathedral's own historical literature as a sealed feature of the crypt space. No official explanation of when it was sealed or under whose authority exists in any document currently accessible to researchers. The cathedral's published guides acknowledge the well and describe it as closed for preservation. Lucan, writing in the 1st century AD, documented Druidic oral tradition associated with the Carnutes, the Gallic tribe whose territory centered on the site that became Chartres. His account describes entities at the sacred sites in this region as beings that required human witness. Not entities that concealed themselves from observation, but entities whose presence at specific locations was conditional on human attention. Something that requires witness is not hiding. Something that requires witness is there, and it is waiting. In the 19th century, during restoration work on the cathedral, Gallo-Roman carved stones were recovered from the foundation layers. The restoration documentation describes the figures on these stones as taller than human scale, with cranial profiles characterized as elongated. This does not match any identified Roman or Gallo-Roman religious iconographic tradition. Standard Roman votive figures, deity representations, and funerary carvings follow proportional conventions identifiable across the Roman world. These do not. The Gallo-Roman stones are acknowledged in academic archaeological literature. They are in storage and not displayed in the public sections of the crypt. 4 successive structures, each built larger than the last, each centered on the same sealed well. Each built by an institution that, at the time of building, already had the prior institution's record of what the well contained. Here's where it gets strange. Lucan wrote in the 1st century AD. He was transcribing oral tradition, meaning the account of non-human entities requiring human witness at this specific location predates Roman occupation by an uncertain period. The Gallo-Roman stones found in the foundation layers of the 12th century cathedral depict figures whose proportional characteristics match the description in Lucan's account. Taller, with elongated cranial profiles. 2 independent records, separated by approximately 1,000 years of transmission, describing the same physical characteristics at the same location. One is a Roman literary text. The other is carved stone found in a foundation. They required human witness, Lucan wrote. The institutions that built 4 successive sacred structures above their well have provided it continuously for 2,000 years. The cathedral's position is that the Puits de Saints Forts is sealed for structural preservation. The Gallo-Roman stones are in storage due to limited display space. The proportional descriptions in the restoration notes are characterized as imprecise aesthetic language. Lucan's account is catalogued as oral historical tradition. The well has not been submitted for independent examination. The Puits des Saints Forts is sealed today. Its sealing date is not recorded in any accessible document. The Gallo-Roman stones are in storage. The beings they depict, in proportions that match no documented Roman tradition, remain unidentified. The well they are associated with remains closed. What did the tradition at Chartres document about what is in the well that 2,000 years of continuous institutional presence has maintained without ever explaining? Who sealed the Puits des Saints Forts? Under what authority? And why does the record not say? Why are the Gallo-Roman foundation stones depicting figures of non-standard proportion in storage, rather than displayed in a crypt that shows other Roman period material? The well at Chartres is sealed in stone beneath 4 layers of church construction, with no recorded sealing date and no recorded authority. The next location does not seal what is below. It manages what is below with an active suppression protocol maintained continuously since the medieval period. At one of the most visited pilgrimage destinations in Christianity, a 175-pound censer has been swinging over sealed subfloor chambers for centuries, burning compounds with documented electromagnetic suppression properties. The chambers it swings above are not on the official architectural plans. Number 10. The suppressor's vault. The year is 1879. Beneath the main altar of Santiago de Compostela Cathedral in Galicia, northwestern Spain, renovation workers have found a casket. Inside, bones. The bones are claimed to be the remains of James the Apostle, the theological foundation on which this cathedral has stood since the 9th century. Archbishop Miguel Garcia Cuesta reports the discovery to Rome. 5 years later, in 1884, Pope Leo XIII issues a papal bull, Deus Omnipotens, authenticating the remains as genuine. No scientific examination is conducted before authentication. The 1884 authentication is theological. The bones have been available for radiocarbon dating since 1949 and for DNA analysis for decades beyond that. They have not been submitted for either. The institution that holds them has not issued a public statement on why not. Directly beneath the same altar where those bones sit, a ground-penetrating radar survey conducted in 2003 identified sealed subfloor chambers that do not appear on any official architectural plan of the building. Above those chambers, a 175-pound censer has been swinging in systematic arcs over the same point since the medieval period, burning compounds with documented electromagnetic suppression properties. The chambers have not been opened. The bones have not been tested. The ritual continues. Santiago de Compostela Cathedral began construction in 1075 over an earlier 9th century church. The 9th century church was built over a Roman structure, the Ara Solis, an altar of the sun, designating a pre-existing sacred function the Romans found already active at this location. The Ara Solis was built over a Celtic sacred site. 3 successive religious traditions, each building over the same point, the same pattern documented at Chartres Cathedral. The cathedral holds UNESCO World Heritage designation. Annual pilgrims number in the hundreds of thousands. The Botafumeiro, 5 feet tall, 175 pounds, suspended on a 213-foot rope and pulley system anchored to the ceiling, traverses the full length of the transept in a systematic arc. The official explanation is purification. Medieval pilgrims arrived after hundreds of miles of travel, and the censer burned aromatic resins to fumigate the air. That function is documented. The Botafumeiro burns 3 compounds: frankincense, copal, and benzoin. All 3 are tree resins with documented ceremonial use. All 3 also have documented electromagnetic suppression properties in bioelectromagnetics research, a field examining the interaction between electromagnetic fields and biological systems. Frankincense, specifically, has been the subject of published bioelectromagnetics research, documenting its effect on electromagnetic field propagation in enclosed spaces. This research was conducted outside any religious context, and makes no reference to Santiago de Compostela. The Botafumeiro's pendulum arc covers the full transept width. The transept crosses directly above the subfloor chambers identified in the 2003 GPR survey. The censer swings above the chambers in a systematic back-and-forth pattern that covers the entire space beneath which the sealed chambers sit. It is performed multiple times annually on major feast days and has been performed continuously in this form since the medieval period. The frequency and regularity suggest maintenance rather than ceremony. Here's where it gets strange. 3 facts in sequence. Sealed subfloor chambers beneath the main altar, identified by radar in 2003, absent from every official architectural plan of the building. Bones found beneath the same altar in 1879, authenticated without physical examination, untested by any scientific method, for more than 75 years, despite both radiocarbon dating and DNA analysis being available. A suppression ritual using compounds with documented electromagnetic properties, tracing systematic arcs over the sealed chambers, maintained continuously for centuries by church authority. No single one of these facts requires the others. Together they name something the official record does not. The cathedral administration has not commented publicly on the 2003 subfloor chambers. The Botafumero's composition is described in official cathedral materials as a traditional liturgical formula unchanged since the medieval period. Bioelectromagnetics research on frankincense and benzoin is conducted independently of any religious application. The bones authenticated by papal bull in 1884 remain in the cathedral, venerated by hundreds of thousands of annual pilgrims, with no scientific confirmation of what they are. The sealed subfloor chambers are still sealed. The bones are still untested. The Botafumero still swings. What is beneath the main altar of Santiago de Compostela Cathedral that requires sealed chambers unmapped on any official plan, bones authenticated without testing, and a centuries-maintained suppression ritual using electromagnetic compounds directly overhead? Why have bones that could be scientifically dated and genetically sourced remained untested for more than 75 years? Who first designed a ritual that traces a systematic arc over the precise location of sealed subfloor chambers, and what were they suppressing? 10 locations, 3 continents, a sealed containment chamber built by a prince bishop for physical evidence of an entity described by 150 isolated witnesses in identical terms, a rock-cut chamber beneath Jerusalem sealed within 72 hours of Vatican notification, a cave sealed by papal decree after centuries of documented inhuman form encounters, sealed passages from an underground world without a sun, a monastery built around a cave to keep a named non-human entity contained, iron-binding vessels built 52 years before their official explanation, a 16-sided containment structure whose kept thing no inquisitor pursued, a sealed well beneath 4 successive church buildings with no recorded sealing date, 9 words naming matter in a lower place, bones above sealed chambers managed by an ancient suppression ritual. The record is what the record is. What the record omits is a different kind of documentation. If this pattern across 18 centuries and 3 continents is something you want to keep following, subscribe. There are 10 more sealed locations that the institutional record does not explain. Comment where you're watching from. If this reached you through the algorithm, like this video so it finds the people who are asking the same questions.